Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, a wise move or a risky one? How President Trump's decision to meet with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un changes the U.S. approach to nuclear negotiations. Then on the fire line, changes at the top of the Forest Service after our NewsHour investigation into a culture of sexual misconduct and retaliation at the agency. Also ahead, we sit down with Wrinkle in Time director Ava DuVernay to talk about her new film and being the first African-American woman to lead a movie of this scale.
It's an indictment of an industry that's ignored incredible black women, brown women, all kinds of women of color filmmakers for decades, over a century.
All that plus the analysis of Mark Shields and Kathleen Parker on tonight's PBS NewsHour. Surprise, praise, skepticism. The range of reactions to last night's announcement that President Trump and North Korea's dictator Kim Jong-un may meet face to face. Hari Srinivasan begins our coverage.
It was a stunning announcement made more so by the circumstances. In the White House driveway by South Korea's visiting national security advisor.
Kim pledged that North Korea will refrain from any further nuclear or missile tests, and he expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible.
South Korean officials had met with Kim Jong-un on Monday and then briefed President Trump Thursday afternoon.
President Trump appreciated the briefing and said he would meet Kim Jong-un by May to achieve permanent denuclearization.
If that does happen, it would mark the first time any sitting American president has met face-to-face with a North Korean leader. Mr. Trump weighed in on Twitter last night saying, quote, "Great progress being made, but sanctions will remain until an agreement is reached." Today, during a visit to Djibouti, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the president's decision was not a surprise.
President Trump has said for some time that he was open to talks and he would willingly meet with Kim Jong-un when conditions were right and the time was right. And I think in the president's judgment, that time has arrived now.
Tillerson argued it's Kim Jong-un who has changed.
What changed was his posture in a fairly dramatic way that, in all honesty, came as a little bit of a surprise to us as well.
A top North Korean diplomat at the United Nations told the Washington Post that Kim's invitation resulted from a broad-minded and resolute decision to achieve peace. The sudden turn of events came after the two leaders had traded insults and threats for more than a year.
In times of war and peace,
this was President Trump addressing the UN General Assembly last September.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
The North Korean leader fired back through a newsreader on state-run TV.
I will surely and definitely tame the mentally deranged U.S. dotard with fire.
The North also launched nearly 24 missiles last year, including intercontinental weapons that it said are capable of reaching the U.S. mainland. President Trump responded with his, quote, maximum pressure campaign of strict new sanctions and stepped up military exercises. Today, Vice President Pence said in a statement, President Trump's strategy to isolate the Kim regime is working. The North Koreans are coming to the table despite the United States making zero concessions. But this afternoon, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders suggested the talks are not definite yet.
We're not going to have this meeting take place until we see concrete actions that match the words and the rhetoric of North Korea.
Meanwhile, in the region, reaction was cautiously optimistic. South Korean President Moon Jae-in spoke in Pyeongchang.
President Trump promised to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un by May. Denuclearization and peace on the Korean peninsula are beginning to be realized.
That hope was echoed by China's foreign ministry.
We must strive for peace and seize opportunity.
But there's also skepticism based on a long history of failure. The U.S. and North Korea signed the so-called Agreed Framework in 1994. It eventually collapsed, with both sides blaming each other for not living up to it. And starting in 2003, the U.S. took part in a series of 6-party talks after North Korea withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They ultimately collapsed when the North expelled nuclear weapons inspectors. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Hari Srinivasan.
And we'll have a full examination of the potential Trump-Kim meeting after the news summary. In the day's other news, a Banner jobs report showed that employers hired more workers last month than at any time since July 2016. The U.S. Labor Department reports a net gain of 313,000 jobs in February. The unemployment rate held at 4.1% as thousands more people started looking for work. But wage growth slowed a bit from January's pace, which eased inflation concerns. The jobs report went down well on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 440 points to close at 25,335. The Nasdaq rose 132 points, and the S&P 500 added 47. For the week, the Dow and the S&P gained more than 3%. The Nasdaq rose 4%. President Trump's newly announced tariffs on most imported steel and aluminum drew sharp rebukes around the world today. The European Union demanded to be told if it will be exempt. And in Beijing, the Chinese Commerce Ministry slammed the move and vowed to protect China's interests.
We think it's perfect trade protectionism in the name of national security. It is an infringement to the rules of the World Trade Organization and will definitely cause serious shocks to the normal order of international trade.
Several Republican senators also criticized the tariffs and called for hearings. In Syria, the Red Cross says that 13 aid trucks managed to get into rebel-held suburbs of Damascus today, despite shelling and airstrikes. Amateur video showed them returning to eastern Ghouta to finish a delivery. After an initial attempt earlier this week, the trucks carried in food for some 12,000 people. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is claiming a major advance against Kurdish fighters in northern Syria. Turkey says the Kurds are terrorists. Erdogan claimed today that Turkish troops have encircled the city of Afrin and are closing in on the Kurds. Video showed militia fighters allied with the Turks driving inside the Afrin district. In Ankara, Erdogan warned again the offensive won't stop there.
Right now, the target is Afrin. An entry into the city is imminent. Tomorrow, we will be in Manbij. The next day, with God's help, we will succeed in clearing the east of Euphrates from the terrorists, all the way to the Iraqi border.
If they do drive east, Turkish forces could come into conflict with U.S. troops that are deployed in the area. Back in this country, Florida's Governor Rick Scott signed a major school safety bill in response to last month's mass shooting in Parkland. The new law raises the legal age to purchase rifles, creates a program to arm some teachers, and includes rifles in a waiting period for buying guns. The Republican governor said that it strikes a balance.
I know the debate on all these issues will continue, and that's healthy in our democracy. People are passionate in their beliefs, and they should be. But we should not insult or disparage each other. We should work together to make our schools safe for our kids.
The National Rifle Association said tonight that it is suing the state of Florida. Former Trump campaign aide Sam Nunberg appeared before a federal grand jury today in the special counsel's Russia investigation. He had initially said that he would not testify. This morning, Nunberg arrived at the federal courthouse in Washington with his lawyer. He stayed into the afternoon. And an executive once reviled for hiking the price of an AIDS drug by 5,000%. Now faces 7 years in prison. Martin Shkreli was sentenced today in New York in an unrelated case. He had been found guilty of defrauding hedge fund investors. Shkreli cried in court and said that he was sorry. Still to come on the NewsHour, changes at the U.S. Forest Service after claims of sexual misconduct. Mark Shields and Kathleen Parker weigh in on the proposed meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. The renowned director who brought us Selma and now A Wrinkle in Time, plus much more. We return to our top story. President Trump's surprise acceptance of the offer from North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, to meet. We examine what's at stake with Michael Pillsbury. He's been advising the Trump administration on Korea. He's also a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he directs the Center for Chinese Strategy. And Sun-Yoon Lee is an assistant professor of Korean studies at Tufts University. And we welcome both of you to the program. Thank you very much. Michael Pillsbury, to you first. Should President Trump have agreed to this meeting?
Yes, absolutely. I think the issue, though, is whether there should be conditions attached that the North Koreans have to fulfill before the trip happens. As you know, the president was very clear that the date and the place are yet to be negotiated. So his agreement to the meeting is subject to quite a few other decisions being made. But overall, this is really a chance for him to become a great president in foreign policy. I wouldn't rule out the Nobel Peace Prize and all kinds of breakthroughs, but we're in the very first phase of this today.
Sun-Yoon Lee, should the president have done this?
Well, how to ascertain, how to understand Kim Jong-un's sudden dramatic outreach as of New Year's Day? Most likely he didn't wake up on New Year's Day and had a moment of epiphany and decided he's going to be a nice guy heretofore. More likely is the fact that Kim does feel the pinch from meaningful sanctions enforcement built up over the past year. But more likely than that, this was all premeditated, pre-planned. It's certainly not unprecedented. Kim is taking a page out of his daddy's playbook from the year 2000.
That's true.
That year in June, Kim Jong-il held the first ever inter-Korean summit with the South Korean president, who we found out later had paid Kim Jong-il $500 million for the privilege of making that pilgrimage to Pyongyang. And then after having softened up South Korea, he turned to the United States and sent, and this was unprecedented, a special envoy to the U.S. president. So Vice Marshal Cho, the highest-ranking military man next only to Kim, visited Washington in early October, conveying the message of invitation to President Kim from his boss. And Clinton was amenable to actually making the visit. He was keen on it and sent his Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, and there she was, 3 weeks later, toasting Kim Jong-il. So don't be surprised if Kim, in the weeks ahead, in trying to persuade President Trump to actually make the visit, send the first sister, his sister who charmed people, melted hearts and minds when she just showed up and flashed a few smiles in the South.
But just to move ahead, it sounds as if Michael Pillsbury, Professor Lee, is saying this could just be a trap, that it's the beginning of something that won't lead anywhere.
Yes, well, he's stealing my lines. I was going to tell you the story of 2000 and the decision then that President Clinton made that he would not accept the invitation to go to Pyongyang.
Right.
Instead, he would send Madeleine Albright, who then advised him not to make the trip because the chances for real progress did not exist. So he's quite rightly pointing out this experience from 2000 that I think affects the Trump team as they think about what to do next. Is why they want to have some conditions before they go.
Well, let me ask you right now, what should those conditions be? We heard the president's press secretary, Sarah Sanders, say today that certain actions have to be taken if this meeting is going to take place.
The Trump White House has not spelled out the conditions yet. They've implied that at least what the South Koreans brought from their meetings have to be implemented. So there's a certain amount of uncertainty, which is very common in diplomacy, as you know, about exactly what North Korea has to do. It's not an unconditional promise that I'll meet you somewhere in the world and we'll have dinner. It's more than that. And both sides now are going to have a secret channel to discuss what exactly are these conditions.
Well, we don't know what those conditions are, but Professor Lee, if those conditions include, for example, certainly no nuclear testing, no belligerent moves, is North Korea prepared to do that? How far do you think North Korea is prepared to go to have this meeting take place?
Well, you see, North Korea has conditioned the world to really lower the bar when it comes to engaging North Korea. What Kim conveyed to President Trump through the South Korean envoys is that now he is amenable to talking about denuclearization and that he will not conduct any missile or nuclear tests. In the meantime, those activities, of course, we know are prohibited by more than 10 UN Security Council resolutions. So the mere utterance of abstention from illicit activities is no concession at all. Fortunately, we have the Cliffs Notes, preconditions for suspending and terminating sanctions, which are codified in the sanctions legislation that was signed into law by President Obama 2 years ago. Sections 401, 402, they explicitly state the preconditions, which are North Korea has to make a meaningful step toward denuclearization, stop censoring the North Korean people, release foreign detainees, abide by the international norms, or as a recipient nation.
I was just going to say, if I may interrupt,
as an aid recipient nation. Yeah.
Just to move this along, because we only have a few minutes left here.
Those aren't the conditions. Those aren't the conditions that the Trump White House is talking about. He's talking about something quite different.
But do you, I mean, to get to something more fundamental, sure, Michael Pillsbury, does anyone in the White House believe that Kim Jong-un is actually prepared to dismantle his nuclear program?
It depends how you define dismantle. The Trump White House has some very experienced talent matched by people at State and Defense and CIA. They've been through the history of the mistakes, the deception, the errors. They've got a vision, as I understand it, which will be worked out. One of the issues, for example, is where will this meeting take place? Should it be in Switzerland, where the North Korean leader can see where he went to school?
Does that really matter that much?
It matters if it's Beijing. I happen to support Beijing because I believe China is our partner in this. It's quite important today that the Trump White House and the Chinese released two different versions of what happened in the phone call today between Xi Jinping and President Trump. The Chinese view is that they are irreplaceable, they're part of this. I get the impression they'd be happy to host the summit in Beijing and then help us with implementation. The other idea is to go to the DMZ in the big, long building there. So that's one of maybe 5 or 6 major decisions yet to be worked out.
A lot to be worked out.
But we've started. President Trump has started. That's the good news.
Professor Lee, Sun-Young Lee, let me just quickly come back to you. Do you believe the North is prepared to go ahead with denuclearization, to dismantle its nuclear program?
Well, in the history of denuclearization, only 4 nations that possess nuclear weapons have bargained them away. And in each of those instances, following a regime change, a new leader. The former Soviet republics, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Belarus, in the early 90s, bargained them away. So did South Africa when it ended its oppressive, systematic racial repression.
No. South Africa did not bargain them away. South Africa gave them away unilaterally. Well, that's closer to the North Korean model that we're hoping for.
Due to sanctions enforcement and a lot of international pressure. We have not seen the kind of meaningful sanctions enforcement that Obama implemented against Iran in getting Iran back to the negotiating table. It took 5 years. Billions of dollars in fines were levied against friendly nations, the biggest bank in France. But nothing on that scale has been tried against China's state-owned enterprises and banks.
Professor Lee, I think your point is that it's difficult, that the example North Korea sees is that it doesn't necessarily pay to dismantle one's nuclear program. Much more to talk about here. We are
one sentence of good news. Xi and Trump agreed today the sanctions remain in place up to the meeting. So there's no purchase of this meeting by
China
sanctions
and other sanctions remain in place. Much more to talk about. We are going to be coming back to this a lot between now and the time that this meeting may or may not take place. Michael Pillsbury here, Professor Sun-Young Lee, thank you very much. This week, the chief of the U.S. Forest Service stepped down following a NewsHour investigation into allegations of a culture of sexual misconduct and retaliation within that agency, as well as questions about the chief's own behavior. William Brangham is here now for more on what this means for the service going forward. William, welcome. So Tony Tooke is his name, the chief of the Forest Service. He's out. What more can you tell us about what's behind this?
Well, last fall, Tony Tooke was nominated to head the U.S. Forest Service. And at that time, a senior retired official from the Forest Service wrote a letter to Congress where she said, you need to be aware of some of Tony Took's past behavior. And the allegation was that Took had a consensual extramarital affair with a subordinate when he was working in Florida. Took allegedly created a special position for this woman and then promoted her up through the ranks. And according to this letter, which we have a copy of, when the affair was discovered by the young woman's supervisor, Took was told, stop communicating with her. But apparently he did not. Here's a direct quote from that letter. Mr. Took not only contacted the female employee, he told her not to say anything more about their sexual relationship or her career, quote, would go down. So that's a pretty clear allegation of sexual misconduct and intimidation on his part. We've spoken to the letter writer and to this woman's supervisor, and we asked the Forest Service about this during the course of our reporting. They acknowledged there was an investigation going on into his past, and then our stories ran online and on the broadcast, and this week Tony Took stepped down.
And in addition, there were other new developments this week.
That's right. We have a new interim chief at the U.S. Forest Service. Her name is Vicki Christensen. She is a 7-year veteran of the Forest Service. Prior to that, she was working forestry in Washington and in Arizona. And she sent out an email to every Forest Service employee that said, in part, we've had to face some hard truths about allegations of harassment and retaliation in our agency. I know we are up to the task. Additionally, we got word today that Congress wants to start looking into this. Congresswoman Jackie Speier of California and Montana Senator Steve Daines said they want to hold hearings to look into this broader culture of sexual harassment within the Forest Service.
And finally, William, you and your team have been hearing from inside the Forest Service community throughout this.
That's right. We set up a tip line that appears on our website, and we have gotten dozens and dozens and dozens of emails from people, former and current employees. Many of them echo the complaints that were voiced in our stories, which was a culture of harassment, and those who speak up about the harassment get battered down for it. We heard from some men who also said, we suffered from harassment as well. We also heard from some other people who said, I don't recognize what you reported. That's not the Forest Service that we experienced. I'd like to read you an excerpt from one letter from one woman who has been in the Forest Service for 25 years. She works in the Midwest, still in the Forest Service, and her letter echoed the feelings of a lot of the letters that we heard. Quote, your article was difficult for me to read, and watching the footage on your show was harder yet. Sexual harassment is embedded into our wildland fire culture. You should know that you got the men in my office to sit up and listen. Most of them were shocked that women view our workplace in that light. Your article has given my coworkers and I a starting point to discuss these issues. I hope the women who have had the courage to speak out realize that they have given us the opportunity to make things better.
Well, it's a shame that it takes something like this to bring people to better awareness, but again, extraordinary reporting. Thank you, William.
You're welcome.
And now to the analysis of Shields and Parker. That is syndicated columnist Mark Shields and Washington Post columnist Kathleen Parker. David Brooks is away this week, and welcome to both of you. Happy Friday. Mark, 2 bold strokes by the president of this week. Let's start with the one that we led the program with tonight. North Korea surprised, I think, a lot of people by saying he will meet as long as North Korea meets certain conditions. Was this the right move?
We will find out if it was the right move, Judy. It was a bold move, make no mistake about it, and it disarmed his critics who had accused him of being his bellicose language, which was provable, and that he was risking the brink of war almost, and especially gratuitously belittling the North Korean leadership.
Little Rocket Man.
A little Rocket Man, and then miraculously, the North Korean seemingly miraculously said, I'm willing to negotiate and consider the possibility of removing my nuclear capability, which I think nobody above the IQ of room temperature believes. But at the same time, the problem with North Korea in the past has not been their willingness to meet or to negotiate or to agree. It's just that North Korea has never kept its word. But the president certainly has taken a bold act, and it's brought us back from the brink of war, and I think there's an audible sigh of relief.
Smart move, Kathleen?
I just see it as a very, very risky, and it's risky because on the one hand, he's giving Kim Jong-un this legitimacy that he has for so long wanted. You know, when the President of the United States says something, it's always important. Everybody listens. And when he does something, it's always important. Markets go up and down when he opens his mouth. I mean, when he can cause wars with his words. And when he now says he's going to meet with North Korea, he is setting himself up for all sorts of problems, potential problems. But he's also, because he's Donald Trump, has lots of wiggle room to pull out of it at the last minute if he decides the circumstances aren't right. We don't know exactly what those are. And it's all just been odd, I think, to have had his messaging about what North Korea is willing to do came from the South Koreans, who then also were the ones to present.
They're the ones who announced it. In front of the White House, and I was taken aback by that. I thought, well, is he out? Did he have a dinner date? So that somebody else had to talk about it. And at what point is Trump going to talk to the country about this very, very important and significant move? And in fact, Mark, it was announced abruptly. I mean, the South Korean official who was at the White House was there. He was going to meet with President Trump today. Yesterday, the president, we're told, it's been reported that he heard he was in the White House, went to see him. The president stuck his head into the press room and said, we're going to have an announcement about that you'll want to pay attention to. So the way it was announced, the way it was handled, raises some questions.
It does raise questions, Judy, but the questions have been raised and continue to be raised. As one Republican explained to me, you have to understand that every day is a new reality show. And that there's no continuity to this presidency, and it's winning the day. It's changing the conversation. He's changed the conversation. What was the conversation? Gary Cohn, his economic advisor, was quitting because of his trade policy. What was the conversation? Stormy Daniels, the porn actress, with whom the president allegedly had, at least the president, people paid $130,000 to just before the election, was going to go public. The disarray in the White House. You name it, Republican civil war, if not civil war strong, but at least Republican strife over his trade policy. This knocked it all off the front pages. I did notice the South Korean National Security Advisor headmastered one of the great secrets of dealing with Donald Trump was he began, continued, and ended the entire conversation by praising President Trump for the meeting, that it was all due to his leadership, his strong, principled positions. And so, you know, this worked for Donald Trump. It got the other bad stories away for at least 24 hours.
Kathleen, how much attention should we be paying to the theatrics of this, the orchestration of it? How much do we learn by looking at that?
Well, I don't know that we learn anything from the theatrics because it's become sort of a template of his. And you do realize you're watching a reality show, but there are other troubling aspects of this, and that includes the fact that we really have no representation in that part of the world. We have no ambassador to South Korea, and our special representative to North Korea has just left the building with mostly probably, I'm not sure, but I think because of a disagreement with Trump about how he was, about his bellicosity. But this fellow, Joseph Yun, was tending toward having these talks. And then add to that, you know, we don't have any real diplomatic involvement. I mean, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is speaking publicly about how we're nowhere close to talking to North Korea, and within the same news cycle, the president is making this announcement or accepting this invitation.
Well, while we're trying to figure that out, Mark, the other surprise the president threw out there this week was his announcement on tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. The president, essentially, we in the press were told there's going to be no announcement, and the president made the announcement in a meeting, surprised even, we're told, members of the White House staff. And as you mentioned, his top economic advisor, Gary Cohn, has stepped down, apparently mainly because of this, because he didn't agree with the move. How do we read that? And I should say the president said we're going to have sweeping tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, but now we're learning there are a number of exceptions.
Number of exceptions. Donald Trump has been consistent in his inconsistency throughout his political career, except for his criticism of free trade. I mean, that has been continuous and relentless. He really views trade as a zero sum, not that it's a rising tide lifting all boats or anything of the sort, and that the United States, under presidents of both administrations, have been rolled. So, I mean, in that sense, there's no surprises. Obviously, there were great surprises in how he did it, and he surprised politically. There was no preparation for Republicans. There was no preparation for the press. There was no preparation in sense of the substance of what the policy was.
And it goes against Republican orthodoxy.
It does go, but he has been consistent on that.
He has.
And I will say for Republicans that the cuts of $1.5 trillion in Medicare did not bother them. Cuts in Medicaid did not bother them. Cuts in social services did not bother them. Change of immigration policy has not bothered them. Repeal of any sense of balanced fiscal policy and balancing a budget did not bother them. They are bothered on trade. This is it. I mean, this is where, you know, quite frankly, Judy, the corporate CEOs are heard, and they are of one mind, and Trump is of the other mind, and that's quite frankly where it stands.
Yeah.
What about that?
Well, no, I agree with everything Mark just said, and you know, it's just humorous, really, that this is the one time that the Republicans are going to dig in their heels and say, this is not a good idea. They're finally going to say, Trump, you're wrong on something. And by the way, you know, what's happened in the White House with the various departures, and most recently Khan, is that Donald Trump is keeping no one around who does not align themselves with his ideas, with his rhetoric, and that was the problem. Khan has disagreed with the tariffs, and he is sort of the last moderate voice that was in the White House, and now that he's gone, you can expect everyone else to stay in line, and when they stop, they will also disappear. And so, you know, as part of this chaotic White House, they've had an awfully difficult time attracting experienced, good people and keeping them. And this is the reason you see all these relatively young and inexperienced people in these key positions, 31-year-olds and 25-year-olds, you know, and running the show, because they say yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, whatever you say is right. And I don't know that Trump can do anything to alienate his base.
Yeah.
But I think we ignore them as well as the theater, because it's what happens among the rest that matters.
We've only got a little.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just one follow-up. I agree with the point Kathleen made. Two people who were not involved in the Korean decision: Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, and Joe Dunford, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Now, if you can think about making policy involving North Korea by excluding, or not including, and relying upon the judgment of these two rather outstanding, remarkable leaders, I just can't believe it, but Donald Trump has done that.
And I just finally, only about a minute left, Kathleen, but I want to bring it back to something Mark brought up earlier, and that is this very awkward situation now involving this woman, Stephanie Clifford. She goes by the name Stormy Daniels, pornographic film star, who is now involved in a lawsuit against the president because of an agreement to keep quiet about what she says was an intimate relationship with the president. And as Mark said, his lawyer paid her $130,000.
$130,000 and made the arrangement using the campaign email, the organizational
The Trump
emails.
campaign.
Yes. Now, this is a very, very interesting, it's more interesting than it appears, because I think this is tracking a little bit along the lines of what happened with Bill Clinton. Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, is mentioned in the Steele dossier, which has been the basis of much of this investigation on both the House side and the Mueller side, and the Russia possible collusion. So it's very possible that Mueller could call Cohen. And at some point, as all good prosecutors do, Mueller tries to get everybody on record lying about something. And we could see this leading to President Trump being put in a position that, as Bill Clinton was, and wouldn't it be the irony of all things that, despite everything else that has happened, this could be something that really does bring him down.
And we don't know what is going to happen, but we certainly have no end of questions and threads to follow at the end of this week. Right. Kathleen Parker, Mark Shields, thank you both.
Thank you.
Filmmaker Ava DuVernay has been breaking down walls in her industry for several years with widely acclaimed films. Now, as Jeffrey Brown tells us, the pioneering director is taking on a different challenge, overseeing the adaptation of a much beloved book, a movie with a big budget and big expectations to boot.
A straight line is not the shortest distance between 2 points.
It's a trip to a fifth dimension of space travel through what's called a tesseract.
Where are we?
A kind of portal through the galaxies, better known to millions of readers as A Wrinkle in Time. Madeleine L'Engle's beloved 1962 science fiction novel for young readers now comes to new life as a big-budget Disney film.
This is our father.
As young Meg Murray and her companions search the universe for her missing scientist father and do battle with dark forces of evil.
I saw the girl. I saw the girl as hero, Meg Murray.
This week in New York, I spoke to director Ava DuVernay.
The girl who's the leader, even though she doesn't think that she is or can be. I loved that story and wanted to make sure that it was told, but also told from a perspective that included images where all kinds of girls and boys could possibly see themselves in it. It's the same story, it just has different skin.
It's a deeply emotional story of love and loss, but one in which science and brains are more important than brute force. The film features Oprah Winfrey, Mindy Kaling, and Reese Witherspoon as the three mysterious astral travelers who serve as guides to the young adventurers.
Two electrons once bonded together in love, if you will.
At the heart of the story here, a mixed-race family, with 14-year-old Storm Reed playing Meg.
I'm conscious of the fact that there hasn't been a hero, a kind of a cinematic leading lady who's the heroine of her own story that's been in the body of a black girl. And so to have the opportunity with Disney's blessing to say, let's expand this and make sure that all kinds of kids can see themselves in the film. And I'm proud of that simply because really something that Mindy Kaling said to me, I used to love this genre, youth fantasy sci-fi, but it never loved me back. I never saw myself in it.
Is this something you thought about from the moment you took it on, or as you were thinking about what you were going to create?
I don't have the privilege of not thinking about it, to be honest with you. It's not like a quirky thing that I think about or comes to mind. It's life. And so when I'm making film, asserting myself in images of people like me, women and people of color, in places where we've been long absent, isn't a kind of cool thing to do for the movie. Asserting my presence in a film is not anything that requires any thought. It just is, because it must be if I'm working on it.
On Twitter, the 45-year-old DuVernay calls herself a girl from Compton who got to make a Disney movie.
Here we go, and action!
Today, she's a top director, producer, and screenwriter, as well as film marketer and distributor, actively working to change the culture of Hollywood.
Cut, nice.
Her 2012 film, Middle of Nowhere, made her the first African-American woman to win the Best Director prize at the Sundance Film Festival.
It is unacceptable that they use their power to keep us voiceless.
She received wider fame and recognition in 2015 with her historical drama, Selma, which received an Oscar nomination for Best Picture. The next year, she made 13th, a critically acclaimed documentary about the intersection of race and mass incarceration.
Don't put the blame on me.
And she's the creator of the OWN network television drama Queen Sugar, set in Louisiana on a family-owned sugarcane farm. As the show's executive producer, DuVernay has made a point to hire all women directors.
Also dangerous.
With A Wrinkle in Time, DuVernay becomes the first African-American woman to lead a $100 million film production.
Is it surprising that that's still a thing?
No, I mean, we live, I work in an industry where, unfortunately, it's no surprise that it's taken until 2018 to make this so it doesn't surprise me. It's bittersweet. It's not anything that I applaud in myself or anything that I wear as a badge of honor. I think it's a real indictment of...
Because you look back at why it hasn't happened before.
Yeah, it's an indictment of an industry that's ignored. Incredible black women, brown women, all kinds of women of color filmmakers for decades, a century, over a century. So the fact that there's been a decision to put a light on me has nothing to do with me. It has to do with, you know, a trend in the industry and the moment that I happen to be standing here.
She recently formed a partnership with the city of Los Angeles and others to fund 150 Hollywood internships for women, people of color, and those with low income. And DuVernay herself became a different kind of role model when Mattel made a Barbie doll of her. At Sunday's Oscars, she appeared in a video calling for wider inclusion. And though she praised this year's event, she says lasting change in the industry is still to come.
I think change is a big word. Is there a spark? Is there a leaning in, an interest, and awareness that change should occur? Yes. But change involves systems. You know what I mean? True change involves, you know, a real, disassembling of architecture and systems that we've not achieved, we've not even gotten close to.
So what does it take to change at this point, beyond the kind of work, you know, individuals like yourself are doing?
There's so many different layers. Filmmaker proficiency, what images are seen as valuable, who are the curators, who are the people who are deciding what the audiences should see, cultivation of audience, selection of where theaters are around the country. There's a cinema segregation that happens in this country. I just took Wrinkle in Time to Compton, a city that has no movie theater. We had to create a movie theater. We had to create a movie theater in Selma to show the film Selma because it's a black community with no movie theater. So then you get into which images are valuable and which audiences are valuable. So it's a complex question.
Yeah, not only what's getting made, but who gets to see it.
That's correct.
Do you see yourself as an artist who is always interested in this examining and remaking the world?
Art is simply entertainment that has meaning. You know, there's some things that are empty calories and there's some things that are soul food. And I prefer soul food.
With A Wrinkle in Time, DuVernay says she has the chance to speak directly to young people.
It's really about, you know, the times that I've been the most content in life are the times that I didn't focus on the darkness, didn't focus on where I was from or what I didn't have. And it's just a shift in perception about the way we walk through our days. Imagine if, you know, you had 1 million people living in that heart space. It would be transformative for the culture.
A shift in perception, like that wrinkle in time that transports the characters in her new film to unimagined worlds. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in New York.
DuVernay's next project is a mini-series about the Central Park 5 case in which black men were wrongly convicted of a brutal rape. And we'll be back shortly with the NewsHour shares on ice that bends. But first, take a moment to hear from your local PBS station. It's a chance to offer your support, which helps to keep programs like ours on the air. For those stations staying with us, as Cuba tries to open up its economy and lure tourists, environmentalists are working to prove that protecting the environment can also be profitable. Here's a second look at science correspondent Miles O'Brien's report from the island nation that originally aired last fall.
This breeding facility for endangered Cuban crocodiles was a revolutionary idea in more ways than one. Cuban President Fidel Castro ordered it built only 3 months after he seized power. It may seem like an odd priority for a young communist revolutionary, but it offered an early inkling that Castro would be an ardent, lifelong environmentalist, able to dictate terms of preservation. Etienne Perez Fleitas is a researcher here.
Having nearly 4,500 animals in captivity helps us to learn many things about the species that we can then use to manage them in the wild.
In addition to the scientific mission, it has also become a big magnet for tourism, making it the picture postcard vision of how to save the nation's natural resources while still attracting the sort of resources Cubans can take to the bank.
The tourism dollars it generates go back into funding the park rangers the overall protection of the wild areas that surround us, and helping us gain a greater understanding of the species.
The idea that the ecology and the economy don't have to be at odds drew researchers from Cuba, Europe, and North America to this scientific conference in Havana this summer. Many of the exhibits and papers I saw as I walked through were trying to prove protection of the environment is a profitable pursuit. American marine biologist David Guggenheim was here giving a talk.
And that's where you're trying to keep that money in the community.
He is the founder of Ocean Doctor, a DC-based nonprofit focused on protecting Cuba's exquisite coral reefs.
At this point, there's a great deal of fear about the impacts of tourism, but our message is that tourism has to be part of the solution, and the question is, how do you do that sustainably?
He and many others here believe the answer lies in Costa Rica.
I've come to Costa Rica to explore.
A nation that set aside more than a quarter of its territory and made that wild beauty its appeal. It's where ecotourism was born and still thrives. But as Cuba opens up its economy and attempts to lure Western investment, there's a lot of pressure to emulate another model, Cancun.
I think Cancun is an example of how not to do tourism sustainably in the Caribbean. So you actually had a collapse of the local economy in Cancun, and in addition, the local reefs died as well. Fortunately, so far, Cuba hasn't succumbed to that, but the pressures on the economy are enormous, and tourism is the easiest place to get hard cash right now.
Guggenheim runs a project to protect an extraordinary reef off Cuba's Isle of Youth. It is brimming with elkhorn coral, which has vanished elsewhere in the Caribbean. Again, Castro, the environmentalist, helped make this happen. After meeting Jacques Cousteau in the 1980s, El Presidente became an avid diver and eventually made 25% of Cuban coastal waters wildlife preserves, with fishing completely banned.
When you do that, it's important also to consider alternatives for the communities that live adjacent to them. And the idea of tourism is to give the community an economically sustainable future that also provides an economic incentive for them to protect their environment. If you're not helping people solve problems in their communities, the environment isn't going to have a chance.
Cuba's enviable undersea environment is not all about dictatorial whim. It is also the silver lining to a very dark cloud, the economic devastation of the early 90s, just after the Soviet Union collapsed. The euphemism for these grim times? The special period. Cubans were cut off from their supply of fertilizers and pesticides. That meant the country avoided chemical runoff from farming, a huge source of pollution and a big contributor to coral reef bleaching. The dearth of agricultural inputs has created another unintended consequence, special in its own way.
In the end, what they did was like a favor, because we rediscovered natural ways of farming, and that has preserved our natural environment.
That's Magdil Colasso Garcia, a worker at an organic farm-to-table restaurant that caters to tourists in Viñales. They serve up a delicious lunch, everything but the fish grown right here on the property.
Today we are seen as pioneers and a model of how to do things right in the future, because when you apply techniques that come from nature, you also create the perfect environment to stimulate ecotourism.
It's a lesson these high school students from New Jersey gobbled up. Their tour leader was Stacy Freeman, a professor from Bethel University.
I've been doing this for 11 years, nationally and internationally with my students, and I travel a lot personally, and this is magic. This is unique.
You are going to put your hand inside a beehive. Okay.
But she has been around long enough to know unique is not guaranteed, and ecotourism is not a panacea.
Sometimes even with ecotourism, you can do damage, And so I'm hopeful that the people that are making those decisions are being careful and really thinking about the culture they have here, the heritage they have here.
But of course, human nature is often at odds with nature itself. Plenty of evidence of that near the crocodile breeding facility. In the gift shop, stuffed crocs are for sale, and at the restaurant, crocodile meat is on the menu. Fast money is better than no money at all. Will Cubans save what's so rare here? Or will they love it to death? In Cuba, I'm Miles O'Brien for the PBS NewsHour.
And now to our NewsHour Share, something that caught our eye that we thought you might be interested in too. Earlier this winter, Henrik Truga filmed his friend, Morten Eina, skating on some very thin ice, less than 2 inches thick, in fact. The result was a mini documentary that captured the eerie, beautiful sounds of bending ice, and it went viral. We recently spoke with Truga by Skype about that day and those unique noises.
My name is Henrik Trygg and I'm a Swedish outdoor photographer. I've been ice skating for 25 years. I think Morten has skated 35 years. The lake is just south of Stockholm. It's just 2,000 meters long and 50 meters wide. The sound was really extraordinary that day because the lake is so narrow and the ice was so thin and the quality was so good. It's just 2.5 day old ice. It's very pristine in the beginning. It's not too thick.
Vad har du? 45 millimeter. Det är ju tjockt ju. Ja, det är tjockt.
It's alive. You feel it, you hear it. So this is like the holy grail. It's like the ice is singing. You hear it when it's getting thinner. The pitch gets higher, the frequency gets higher. So we just started recording. You hear the noise best when you skate 10 to 20 meters away. So I just took it directly into my camera. It's a very high-pitched tone, so it was fairly okay to record it with the built-in mic. So it's nothing fancy about it. I skate here because there's nothing much more to do in the Stockholm winter. And I really enjoy the adventure. I'm very curious. I want to see how far can we go? Where can we go? You can have adventure just outside your doorstep. You don't have to travel to the other side of the world. You can get your fix here.
My question is, how does he not fall through the ice? We'll let him answer that. You'll find more online when we explain the math behind this skater's thin ice feat. That is on our website, pbs.org/newshour. And Robert Costa is preparing for Washington Week, which airs later tonight. Robert, what's on tap?
A moment of truth on trade for the president. We'll explain why the new tariffs on steel and aluminum may be about winning a political war as well as a trade war. Plus, after months of threats, that potential breakthrough with North Korea tonight on Washington Week.
And we will be watching. Thanks, Robert. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Have a great weekend. Thank you and good night.
You're watching PBS.